So we'll quick look at our movie class here, which has been provided for you. And there are some conventions that Entity Framework uses. So if you use the class followed by ID as a property name, it assumes that that is the primary key. If you use ID as a property name, it will also assume that that is the primary key. Okay? And if you created another table and we used movie, which belongs to another class, an ID, if we put that into a different table, it would assume that it was a foreign key. So there are some assumptions that are made. Another assumption is that whatever your primary key is, if you make it an integer, it is going to be an identity column. And an identity column is one that automatically numbers. So you will not need to enter data for the identity column. In fact, when we generate the views in the create page, you will not see an entry for the ID because it's going to be automatically populated. Data validation is what you see in brackets. And there are, oh boy, all sorts of data annotations that you can use for validation. So we're just kind of taking a look at some of the more basic ones. Later in the course, you are going to see a full list. So that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. So you can see that we are indicating if something is required or not, and we are displaying our own custom error message if they don't key anything in. And also we have a valid range that we're specifying. And if they don't key in that range, we are going to display our custom error message. Okay, so those are the annotations that we're using in here. Another one that is useful, although it's not needed here, is a display annotation, which lets you change the name of the field that is displayed in the view. So if you don't, by default, it's going to pull these names as is. Sometimes the way that we want our database columns named is not the way we would want the name to display in a form. So there is a display attribute that will let you change the name. And I've got this in the lab exercise or in the last hands-on, but basically how this works. Oops, I got to put it in brackets. And then whatever I would put here, that then this would be used in place of this in all of the forms. But in the actual database itself, when it creates the column, it's going to use this. So now that you know a little bit about the conventions and how to override the conventions, because that is what data annotations are used for, we are going to be adding some seed data. And the seed data goes into our context class. And in order to add seed data, we have to override the on-model creating method. And the on-model creating method is part of our DB context class. So we override the method and we pass it a model builder object. And then we can use that model builder object to add data. or to seed data in our tables. So all of this code goes below our table definition here. And so I'm going to pause while I enter the code. All right, so I have added the on-model creating method. I have passed a model builder object, and it's typically just called model builder. And then I'm using that object to add data. Okay, so I'm telling it that this is my movie class and it has data. And actually, I'll put that on the next line. So here it says new movie. You really only have to fill in what is required. And even though ID is going to be an identity column, when you are seeding the data, you have to fill it in. Okay, so you can see I'm filling in the data. I could omit any data that's not required, or I can fill it in. A couple things to note is that there's commas after everything except for the last one. And if you're going to do more than one row, you need a comma after each row except for the last one. Okay, so the commas can mess you up, so you need to watch out for that. Okay, and then you do need to be kind of aware of data types because you know, you're only going to do quotes around the data that you have defined as string. String converts over into variable character. Okay, so if you're ever confused about what the data types are, once you perform migrations, you can actually take a look at the database itself. And we'll be covering that shortly. So at this point, I am kind of done. This is all I'm going to seed my database with. I'm going to save this and run a build.